one key concept. It's the building blocks that everything sits on. It's a foundation for a true, vibrant, lean culture. That's the way we think when we run our factory. This concept has the power to change company culture.
This is, as we were prepping for this podcast, Ryan was sharing, it is the reason why lean exists. And without it, it's like the little foundational block of the Jenga tower. If you take this away, it's just not going to work. Doesn't matter how big your company is. Doesn't matter how cool your company is. If you don't have this missing piece of the puzzle, it's just not going to work. So Ryan, could you give us an example of this not existing that you've come across to show how bad it is when it's not applied?
So my father was a building contractor, built large factory buildings, housing projects, loads of different building projects throughout his building career. And one of the things I noticed working with him when I was younger was that every single department or every trade that came into the building site were all working in silos. So the bricklayers didn't care about the plasterers didn't care about the painters that were coming behind them. The painters didn't care about the carpet guy. Everybody worked in silos and kind of looked after themselves. And it's kind of a realization that we have had and I have had over the past few years, and something that we talk about a lot at our company is this concept of thinking of the next person. So thinking of the next person, if you come, anybody that has been on a tour will hear our people saying this over and over and over again. It comes up every single day. So our entire goal and the reason why we do lean is because we're thinking on the next person. And without this foundation, as you said right at the start, it's the building blocks that everything sits on. It's a foundation for a true, vibrant, lean culture. It really is. This one key concept, thinking of the next person.
It's really interesting because that kind of is the Western disease in a way. It's the individual over the collective. And it's no wonder that lean came out of somewhere like Japan, where that individualism is just totally flipped on its head. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
Where did you, in a business context, really, like, what was the penny drop moment for you?
And we visited a company in Idaho in the US about 5 years ago. This company is called In the Ditch Towing Products. They make products for the towing industry, huge company, and probably the best lean SME in the world, I would say. A phenomenal company. The owner of the company is a guy called Chuck Ciccarelli.
What a name.
Yeah. And as we walked around his facility, something that he kept saying was this idea of working as a team and not working in silos. He always kept saying, like, thinking of the next person, thinking of your other team members, thinking of your co-workers, thinking of the customer. It's almost an unselfish attitude to have. And that's kind of when the penny dropped, because we came back and we started saying, we need to think on the next person, thinking of the next person. It's not about me doing my job. How can I pass the product? How can I pass the service? How can I pass the information on to the next person so that they can receive it in the best possible way for them to do their job?
Right. I thought you were going to say pass the ball. It's like just come off Euro season, so like everything's like a football metaphor around here. But football's not, that's not a bad shout actually, because, you know, if you look at like an individual sport, like if you're a sprinter, it is selfish, and it's like, I just have to beat the other person. It's just me, and how am I feeling, and how am I doing? But like if footballers played like this, and you could kind of, you know, critique and make jokes about how some footballers actually do, like if everyone's trying to score, it's just not going to work.
It doesn't work. Yeah.
You need that team, and you need to function as a team. Otherwise, it's just, you're going to get annihilated.
Yeah, I suppose it's the difference on a running race and a relay race. You know, in a relay race, they're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking, how can I pass this baton to the next person? So they spend a lot of time and go into a lot of detail on the changeover to think on that next person so that they can receive the baton and run. And that's the way we need to think when we're running an organization. That's the way we think when we run our factory, when we run our business. Every single person in the process has to be, you know, dealt and fed and thought of as a customer who we think highly of. We're thinking of the next person.
It's so funny. We just had lunch with Tom Hughes and Matt Sims, who we just did an episode with. And I'd never heard this before. Did you hear what he said? It was like a rugby analogy. A hospital pass.
Hospital pass.
Had you heard that before?
No,
I'd never once heard that, and I played a bit of rugby. Hospital pass, basically just like you can give someone a good pass or you give someone a hospital pass, and it's like the worst pass ever. It like takes them out, or they have to really, really go out of their way, and it like really messes them up.
Yeah.
And in your team, in your organization, you're not looking to give people passes.
That's
What,
right.
what did you see with Chuck? Like, how practically were you seeing the people thinking of the next person?
Well, when the penny actually dropped was the moment we were walking through his welding shop, and he just showed us how the goal of their entire team is to think on the next person and pass the material to the next person in the best possible way. So in the welding shop, they would make sure all the holes were deburred, there was no sharp edges. They would position the part on the painting rack in the exact way that the paint department needed it to paint it.
Right.
So they were thinking on the next person. Design is a massive part, and loads of companies listening to this podcast have a design department. How many design departments have no connection with the shop floor?
Right.
They're not thinking of the people who are reading the drawings. They're not thinking of the guy that has to assemble that physical part. And there's a huge gap there. So that's why I get so excited about this one concept, because this concept has the power to change company culture. It absolutely has.
And it's interesting because we've been talking a lot about the school system recently and the way education's done, like in Northern Ireland and further afield. And it is like, it's a bit of an individual sport. It's like you get your grades, you be better than everyone else around you. It's hyper individualistic.
Yeah.
And then you get spat out into the real world and you realize, oh, if anything that I ever do is ever going to work, it has to be a team sport. And I think this is even like something as a young entrepreneur that I really struggled with. Was I was a solopreneur for many years. And I was so fixated on just, I had a selfish mindset. And it was only whenever I started to realize, like, collaboration and teams and working with other people and all this sort of stuff is actually, that's whenever I started to experience any sort of breakthrough. if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Give us an example of this concept in your personal life. Because I feel like sometimes by going into like the personal every day, it helps the penny drop whenever we then go into more detail on the business.
Yep. A really good simple example is last week, myself and my wife went to a concert here in Belfast. So if we're thinking on the next person when we leave that concert, who's the next person? The next person is the cleaning team coming in to tidy up. So if we're thinking on the next person, we're going to put our rubbish in the bin before we leave. We were at the cinema last night with my family in Belfast again. Funny, we're up here a lot.
Flip me.
or 2 nights ago. But the thinking is, okay, we're going to think on the next person. We're not going to leave the popcorn tubs and the drinks bottles and we're not leaving it all here for the cleaning team to come in after the film's over to tidy up. We're going to think on the next person.
Right.
We're going to put it all away. We're going to make sure there's no rubbish and leave it nice and tidy and clean because we're thinking on the next person. And that's what I'm trying to get my kids to realize. And if they grow up with that level of understanding and respect, that'll filter into everything they do.
Yeah.
So it works when you're leaving a concert. It works when you're getting up from your seat at the cinema. When you're at the gym, you want to think on the next person that's coming to use that equipment. You're going to clean it down, make sure it's perfect for the next person. Because we all need to remember, and we need reminded of this, that it's not about us. This is not about us. We're all in a team sport. We're all playing team sports. And we need to think on the next person.
Yeah. So translating that into the actual business world and into your company, how do you start to, or how have you instilled this idea of thinking of the next person in the line like Chuck has?
It's something that is thankfully ingrained in our culture now. If we're sending wooden parts to your next stage, we're going to go to the next stage and say, how would you like these organized so that I can stack them in the correct way?
Nice.
So the first thing that you need is at the top of the pile. And it seems like a simple thing, but when we think about the next person, when we're thinking about the next person, a byproduct of that is efficiency. So I think there's too much talk out there about productivity, efficiency, metrics, measuring non-value added activity. There's lots and lots of talk about that. But a really simple way to get there is to just think on the next person.
Right.
Because when you think on the next person, you're reducing burden from that person, which in turn reduces waste.
Right.
So it's actually a really simple way to reduce waste. Just think of the next person.
And the upward spiral effect of that would be massive.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, for our businesses, it would lead to not only a lot of amazing efficiency, but just better jobs and better everyday working environments for our people.
Absolutely. And we had a really good example a few weeks ago when somebody was leaving our company, and the week before they left, they documented all their processes so that they could think on the next person. We didn't even know who the next person was going to be. We hadn't allocated someone else to do that job. We hadn't found a new person. But they knew that if they thought of the next person, they would leave their job in a way that somebody else could come in and take over. So it's why we do standard works. It's why we do improvements. It's why we put labels on things. It's why we shadow our tools. It's why we have a morning meeting. This is the why behind everything.
Right.
And in preparation for this podcast, I actually got really excited about this because it absolutely is the reason why we're doing lean.
Yeah.
We're thinking of the next person, which is the next person in the line, but it's also the customer using the product. It's also there's no end to the next person.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic way to think.
When you're on the receiving end of waste, it can feel very personal. Like it can feel almost like vindictive, where you're like, oh, that person put that thing at the bottom of the pile and now I have to. But the reality is actually most of the time we just accidentally pass on waste. Right. And like your example of the socks, if you want to share that's actually quite a good one.
The socks, this happened last week where at home I would always like fold my socks and put them in the wash basket.
Right.
And my wife finally realised that, hold on a minute, he's not thinking of the next person. And she said to me, would you mind when you put the dirty socks in the wash basket, don't fold them up, because the first thing I have to do is unfold them again to put them in the washing machine.
Yeah.
So I wasn't thinking of the next person. I wasn't thinking of the person who's going to be washing the clothes, washing the socks.
Yeah. That was just like accidental waste.
Yeah.
So that communication is really interesting. Mm-hmm. How do you, in an organization, enable those conversations to happen where it's like, Ryan, please stop folding your socks?
This is where the morning meeting comes in. This is why lean is like a set of tools. It's an array of tools that one doesn't work without the other. So the connection there is the morning meeting. The morning meeting, that's why we have a morning meeting, because anybody can put up their hand and say, actually, there has to be a better way to pass the wood from the wood department to the upholstery department, because I'm spending too much time reorganizing the parts or whatever it is, and that's an opportunity to improve. But what sits below the morning meeting is a culture where people are willing and able to speak up when they find a problem or when they come across burden. So the morning meeting is what ties this all together, or having a culture with openness.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is just that communication. The sock analogy is perfect because the one thing is just those two parties communicating with each other. Mm-hmm. And so when you have, like you mentioned, the construction trade at the very start with the painters and the joiners and whatever, because all these are different teams and, you know, you said working in silos, allowing each department to really be able to come together like that and interface and have honest, please, Jimmy, would you not put that on the bottom of the pile? If you put it on the top, it would save us like 15 minutes every day. Yeah. I'd be like, oh, mate, thanks for telling me. Now I know how to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. What else? What else helps with and like distilling this as part of the air that your company breathes, your culture?
The first thing is to build a culture which is thinking like this. It's okay for one or two people to think like this, but the real power comes when everybody thinks like this. A really good example a few weeks ago was that we redesigned the packaging for our product, because we were putting the label with the address on where we thought was easy for us. But we soon realised that our customer had to turn the box. If you can imagine a Euro pallet fitting onto a lorry, and all the labels were facing the wrong way. And every delivery, the customer had to like get up and kind of look in between two boxes to see what the delivery address was, because that was easier for us.
Right.
But we weren't thinking about the next person. So once we started to think about the next person, we asked a few customers, where is the best place to place the label for you? And they said, definitely on this side of the box.
Wow.
So we redesigned our packaging, designed 2 wee markers into the packaging, and now we have a place for exactly where the delivery address goes. And it's in the same place every time, and it's in the place where the customer can read it without looking to the side. It seems like a small thing, but it's actually a really, really big thing. It's a wee bit more work for us, but that's okay, because the goal is it's not about us.
Right.
It's to think on the next person. So now the customer can see that address straight away, and it relieves so much burden. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, like literally physical burden, mental burden, time burden, like flip's sake burden. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's massive. And it is funny because I remember at the very end of the Lean Summit, we did a recap episode together. I think that's the morning after. And we talked about that German phrase, one hand washes the other.
That's right.
And that's the beautiful thing. Whenever you're in an environment and a culture that has this unselfish mindset, it's a culture where everyone is serving each other, because the fear and the hesitation is, but if I don't take care of my needs and myself, it's like, then I'm not going to, I'm just going to be wasted.
Yeah.
But the tribe takes care of you. And by you taking care of your customers, they in turn take care of you, because they give you repeat business. They love to work with you. They want to work with you more. You get more orders. You get more better service delivery. So it's a very virtuous cycle that I think it's just, not only is it a better way to do business, but it is a more successful way to do business as well.
It is.
Wider speaking, level 3, we always like to hit on a wee bit of philosophical sort of stuff. We mentioned the difference between, the West and somewhere like Japan. But how do you think, if we start even with like Northern Ireland, because we quite like to do that, if we in Northern Ireland started to think of the next person, what do you think that would look like, and what do you think some of the impact would be? Well,
I think what we're doing at our company is very, very different. It's the opposite of what most companies are doing. But thankfully, loads and loads of companies are seeing what we're doing and developing similar cultures to that in their organizations, to the point now where there is hundreds of companies around the world developing vibrant, lean cultures. And if more companies can do that, the ripple effect of that is huge. Like if we have 60 or 70 people in our company, they're teaching this type of thinking to their families, and it's going into schools, and it's going to the wider environment around the physical company itself is benefiting from this ripple effect. So the more companies that get involved in this, the more companies that get on board with lean, that you don't even have to call it lean. Call it a culture of respect. That's really all it is.
Yeah,
we're building a culture of respect where people are thinking of the next person. It's a culture of unselfishness, and the more people do that, it can only be a positive thing. Your daughter was in the studio with us this morning. My daughter's up here today. They're already starting to think like this because they're feeding off us.
Yeah,
we done a podcast earlier today where Matt was talking about getting lean into schools. That's the ripple effect of that is huge. So the more we do this type of thing, the more we spread the message, the more companies and organizations that get onto this type of thinking, it will eventually change a nation. It could change an entire culture in the way that we think. It absolutely could.
It's really interesting. So I just got back I was hosting it was the International Trauma Summit. So it's all about childhood trauma and intergenerational trauma and societal trauma and all this sort of stuff. Some really like the best speakers in the world on that topic. And I think inherently we as humans have a desire to solve the pain that we ourselves experienced. So for example, if you grew up with an abusive parent, every single person that I've talked to from that environment says, I want to make sure I don't do that for my kids. So you're thinking of the next generation, you're thinking of the next person, or people who've grown up in a time of war. They're like, I want to ensure that there is peace for my kids.
Yeah.
And so there is something very, very deep inside of us that wants to be a cure to the disease that we ourselves experienced. And there is a fork in the road, because we can also be perpetuators of that pain as well. Yeah. And so if you bring that back into a work environment, if you had a terrible manager, you could, whenever you get into a managerial position, you'd be like, well, now it's my turn, and now everyone's going to know, and everyone's going to listen to me, and like, whoa. Or you can actually say, no, I have a choice here. I'm actually going to be the manager that I wish that I had. And I think it is one of the hardest, but also the most courageous things that you can do, but to choose that upward spiral rather than that downward spiral. Because it's tough, and it's really, really hard to move away from that. Yeah. But I think it's the only way that we can bring about significant and lasting change for whether it's our organizations or our families, or indeed, as we always say, like, wide society as a whole.
Yeah.
Like, for the business owner listening, we like to think at this stage of the episode, they're like, all right, I'm in. You've sold me.
Yeah.
Like Rosca, like producer Rosca, I'm crying while I'm driving my car. I'm pumped up. I'm psyched. I want to think of the next person. I want to do this for, my team, my family, the world. If you were to give people one action step or one bit of homework, what would you encourage them to do?
I think the first thing is to be mindful and hyper aware of your actions. So if you're listening to this driving the car, or if you're at work, or if you're in Starbucks getting a coffee, wherever you are, be mindful of your next actions and try and think about, who is the next person here? Who is the next person in the process? Who's the next person that I'm passing information to in the next hour after I listen to this podcast? Am I sending an email with all the information so that they don't have to go back and forward 2 or 3 times looking for more information? Try and think of the person receiving that email and think, what information could I put on to make sure that I'm giving them the best information? Who is the next person in the process? So be hyper aware of your next actions, even for the next hour. Set a challenge for 1 hour from now or 2 hours from now. Be hyper aware of your next actions, and you'll be surprised at how many next people there is.
Right.
When you go to the shop and you maybe walk past something on the shelf and it's turned the wrong way, or something's fell on the floor, just stop. Just take a second and fix it, make it better. Think of the next person. When you're walking through a busy office, just hold the door for somebody. Think on the next person. And as we build up small marginal wins, small marginal gains, and start thinking like this, and get that right first for a week or 2 or a month, and then we'll start developing it into bigger things. Then we can start and systemize our business and develop, and this is the key, develop a culture within our business where everybody thinks like this.
Yeah.
Because once we develop a culture where we have everybody, or most people, not even everybody, most people thinking like this is the key to operational excellence. This is the key to efficiency. This is the key to productivity. Forget all the fancy stuff that you've ever heard about reducing waste and increasing productivity. This one concept, thinking of the next person, will get you there.
Yeah. You used the word respect. And that respect is like an upward spiral. Like that energy that you pass on to someone, even something simple like when you said holding the door for somebody, it's like, how does that make them feel? Like, what does it do to their face? Do they smile? What does that do to their brain? And it makes them more likely to almost like pay it forward. And the ripple effect of that's really, really strong. And it's funny, actually, I was in an airport recently, and I never ever would have like cleaned an airport toilet before meeting you. And now I almost feel like anytime I walk in and it's a bombshell, I'm always like, oh man, what would Paul, Ryan, and Brad do? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And by taking it takes 10 seconds to just wipe the toilet down and, pick up a few things off the floor and wash your hands and you're done. But it prevents the downward spiral from happening, because then if the next person comes in and it's just a mess, and then they make a mess, and then the next person comes in and it's even messier. Whereas if you come in and everything's all nice and it's clean and it's pristine, you almost feel like a little bit of obligation. Like if I made a bit of a mess, I better keep the standard high. And that's something that I hear you say quite a lot, is the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I think if we all took hold of this idea and realized that by elevating the standard for ourselves and the people around us, it actually elevates the quality of life for everybody, whether that's inside the office or inside the factory or outside in your personal life.
Yeah. We even had a really good example. It's a good while now since we implemented this, but the company that picked up our products at the factory to deliver them to our customer, the delivery company, we would close for lunch and everybody would go and eat their lunch in the canteen. And we would leave the delivery drivers sitting outside in their trucks, taking over, waiting for us to get back from our lunch. And once we started thinking of the next person is the delivery guy that has loads more deliveries and stops to do to get home to their family, to see, to finish their day. When we started thinking of the next person, we just have a rota system where we take turns, where every delivery driver that's coming in or out of our factory gets served right away. Because we have a rota system where somebody is taking turns to drive the forklift and look after the delivery guys while the other person's on lunch. But this one simple thing makes all the difference for the next person. They're half an hour home earlier in the evening. They get to see their families. They get to eat their dinner on time. So when we actually change our mindset to this way of thinking, there will be ideas and improvements and suggestions that you would never have thought of yourself. But when we opened this idea out to our entire team, that's when it really started to embed.
It's class. Thinking of the next person. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you.